Juraj Slafkovsky is doing something that we basically haven't ever seen at the NHL level. His stats at his size for his age is something in the modern NHL that just doesn't happen at all. We'll be diving into those stats, plus a projection from the hockey writers on the Habs lineup for next season and where we agree and disagree. Finally, some pretty significant waiver issues heading into next season for the Habs, so stick around for this edition of Habs Digest. Jesse, Juraj Slafkovsky, he's one of our favorite things to talk about on this channel. And by the way, guys, if you haven't subscribed, hit subscribe now if you're watching the video and you're enjoying, because we could really use it. But Juraj Slafkovsky, let's take a look at some stats from Big Head Hockey, because it's unprecedented. Every 18-year-old who's been 6'3 or 238 plus to play 10 games in the NHL since the lockout, which was 04-05, it's just Slafkovsky and Victor Hedman. There isn't a modern comparable for Slafkovsky. Well, let's look at points last season for forwards that were 6'3 and 235. Slav is there at only 10 points, along the likes of Ovechkin, Anders Lee, Nick Ritchie, Milan Lucic, and that doesn't really look impressive until you look at this. The same stat line, but from when those guys were 18 years old. We haven't seen a prospect this big play this early in the NHL before, and not only play this early, but convince his team to not send him down to the minors. What he's doing is completely unprecedented, and did it shock you to see these stats? Because I guess it didn't really surprise me. Juraj Slafkovsky really is one of a kind.
It is, and this is really why the Habs picked him, is he's such a combination of that skill and that size, right? Which is just so rare. What I love about this player is that he fits today's speed game so well. We see, and he's obviously improving on his cardio this year, but he also has that size, which, is a throwback to that classic NHL, which is just always going to be beneficial. So for me this year, Juraj Slafkovsky, he's going to be one of the most exciting players on the Habs to watch, just because he's going to be able to bring both of these elements to the table. So this is honestly really amazing to see. And it goes to show of we need to be patient with a player like this, because a big reason why a player this big and at this age often isn't even in the NHL yet is because it really takes time to grow into your body, and then to also get that control of yourself that's needed at such a young age. You're growing so quick. To obviously be an effective player in the NHL, that control is so important. So I think, he's right along that learning curve. And I still believe he could be like that Jaromir Jagr type player in the future with the Stanley Cups to boot.
Wow, that's some very, very high praise. And, I was actually going to use another ex-Penguin superstar to do a comparable. Now, before you leave a bunch of comments telling me to pump the brakes, I'm not saying Slafkovsky is going to be as good as someone like Mario Lemieux, but just when you talk about, right, it's not going to be close. Yeah, don't worry. But at the same time, when you talk about these big, big bodies who have that ability, Slav hasn't quite shown it at the NHL level yet, but it very well could come, to have that ability to kind of dance through defenders, but also lay the body. The way they move around the ice at their size almost looks unnatural. And it's that ability that Slafkovsky possesses amongst grown men, which he basically already is as a 19-year-old, able to just bounce around them when everyone's up to his shoulders, right? It looks crazy. It looks like a unicorn, right, out there on the ice. So he has that ability and the ability to put it together, and he's kind of proven that, right? Again, no one, at least not in the modern, within the last 20, 25 years, no one at his size at forward has had this kind of skill and played at the age of 18. Now, Jesse, there's always concerns about, Habs prospects in the past. Oh, they rushed him into the NHL. Do you think that is maybe a problem for Slafkovsky, or do you think that his experience in the NHL last year will actually do him good moving forward?
I think obviously it was a big adjustment kind of coming from Europe to the NHL right away. Well, obviously the quickness of the game is huge, but what's nice about this is even though he was injured, which obviously wasn't ideal, it really gave him a sense of how quick the game is. Mm-hmm. So he really knew what to improve on for this offseason, right? So you got to feel like he's targeting exactly that. And the thing that's going to take Juraj Slafkovsky's game to the next level is speed. Mm-hmm. And I think he really realizes that. Obviously, that goes so well with Montreal's game as well. But just losing a little bit of weight, kind of focusing on that cardio, kind of working on things to kind of increase his vision, which he's been using some pretty advanced techniques, working with some pretty interesting people in sports science to really develop in this way. I think he's focusing on the exact ways that are going to make him a better player. Because being that big, imagine then being mobile with that kind of all over the ice, being able to move that quick and that big, you're creating havoc all over the ice. So that's what I think is really scary. Obviously, I think that's what he should be focusing on. And I think the Habs management and Uri agrees as well.
Yeah, I think they see that potential in him, right? And again, to do what he's doing at his age, at his size, is completely unprecedented. So it'll be super fun to see his progression. And in a couple of years, once he's finally hitting his strides, I just cannot wait to see what kind of beast he can become. Topic 2 today, Jesse. It's about time for these to start. These predictions for the Habs lines heading into next season. Now, obviously, there are going to be some more moves made, whether that's buying out Yoel Armia, trying to trade Mike Hoffman or Christian Dvorak, sure. But as of right now, these aren't our predictions. This was taken from TheHockeyWriters, and they made an article talking about basically who's going to play for the Habs and who's not. And let's just take a look, because I agree with most of it, but there's some parts where I disagree. And first of all, as you look at this, pause the video, let us know in the comments what you would change around here. Jesse, the first thing that I notice, maybe the first thing, is that they have Cayden, Guhle, and David Savard as the top defensive pairing. Now, I'm just going to come out and say we did a video talking about how that pairing last year was one of the worst statistically in the NHL, and Cayden Guhle was far better with young players. So my personal change is don't have Guhle with Savard. Keep Mike Matheson up there with Savard. Keep Guhle with someone like Harris or Barron. But other than that, I think it's all right. What was your main concern when you saw their prediction for the Habs lineup?
Yeah, I agree with you, Josh. You got to listen to the analytics. You know, it really doesn't lie. I see where they're going for with that, with Guhle, with Savard. Is they're trying to balance like that mobility with maybe a player that isn't quite as mobile. So obviously Guhle's a great skater. David Savard is still a great skater, but not quite as mobile, and trying to balance that out with Matheson. Again, on that second line, kind of a little bit more of a mobile guy, with having a pairing, where maybe not as quite as mobile again. So I get where they're trying to balance that out, but I would definitely agree. I think Matheson did everything last year. Guhle obviously had a great season, but as a rookie, I don't think he's quite earned that spot yet to kind of come on that top line, especially at that left wing where we're so stacked. So I would agree with you there that I would have Matheson on that top pairing.
Yeah, I think so too. It is a bit of a weird choice. As for forwards, we're just going to pop it up right now. The only thing that I would maybe see change is I personally think the Habs are going to start the season with Kirby, Dach at center. I think the second line might be something like Newhook, Dach, Monahan with Anderson bumped up to the top line, even though that line, Anderson, Suzuki, Caufield, was also not good analytically. When it comes to forwards, Jesse, is there anything you'd switch around? I know you're a big Slafkovsky guy. Does it maybe hurt to see him down there on the third line with the guy who's probably going to be traded soon in Christian Dvorak?
Well, he's a first overall pick. So at a certain point, you need to kind of nurture him and kind of into that top six sort of role, right? You need to put him in a position to succeed. But it is normal to work your way up, right? Caufield, obviously, there was a time where he played fourth line with the Habs, even Suzuki, right? This is just part of it. You need to work your way up. So I think he will get there. And for that reason, I think Newhook will probably get that start on that second line. Mm-hmm. But I would like to see Slav at a certain point kind of get up to that second line as well. I think when we're looking at our lineup, though, for the Habs, the first and most important thing to address is that first line, right? Mm-hmm. And True. I think, again, going with the analytics, I think we definitely want to put Dach, we want to put Caufield, and we want to put Suzuki together. They're actually a very underrated line when you actually look at some of the underlying numbers for them. They were actually on a point per game pace for the time that they did play together. So they were solid, and you could make an argument that Newhook might look good on that first line. However, I would argue that the size of Kirby Dach would be much more effective on that first line with two, they're not smaller, Caufield obviously a little bit more so than Suzuki. So I think Dach would look great there on that first line. I think we need to get that figured out first. Yeah. That's kind of, that's so foundational for this team, getting that first line. But like you said, right, there's so much benefit of having Dach at a center. So for sure, we're going to see him at times. We're still testing this out. Nothing's set in stone, right? And I think that's wise. You don't want to kind of typecast these players too quick, but obviously you don't want to take having a good first line for granted, and obviously that's really important because that's what's going to bring out the best in Suzuki and Cole and everything else. So I think Dach, having him there would be important. Slav, I could see a world, obviously, like I said, kind of having him on that second line with Monahan, with Anderson. I think that would be an interesting line. Huge. I'm even interested in the third line of maybe even having Newhook play some 3C instead of Dvorak, just because we know that obviously Newhook fits a lot more into the long-term plans of this team. And I think the Habs management, even though he's not great at the dot, feel that he would be more effective in that center ice position. I think you're getting more out of the player if he could turn into a great 3C than, let's say, a 2C winger or obviously a 3C winger. So that's obviously debatable, but there's something to be said there. So I think, Newhook there, probably good likelihood, though. He is on that second line to start off. Slav is kind of changing position on that third. But, for the most part, I think they did do a pretty good job on this lineup. But obviously there's a little change, which I think definitely needs to be addressed. That is here that we don't agree with, which I think we'll be getting into pretty soon.
Yeah, and I think you raise a good point before we get into the final topic, is that this stuff's going to change. You can only predict one lineup, and I think the Habs are going to run with about 5 or 6 different combos in the first few weeks. So predicting just one is very difficult. But overall, yeah, I think you're right. It's maybe one big issue, but the rest, pretty good. Final thing for the video, very quick, I just wanted to point out some potential waiver problems for the Habs. Now, if you guys aren't aware, this season upcoming, Jesse Ylonen has not signed an extension yet with the Habs, but it looks like he probably will. It seems like they're just discussing, whether it'll be a two-way deal, which it probably will be, and what his AHL salary will be, that kind of thing. But he is not waiver exempt anymore, meaning that if he gets called up to the Habs and they want to send him down back to Laval, he has to clear through waivers, which means every single team gets a chance to take him at his current contract for free. So that kind of, raises a bit of a problem for the Habs forwards. And if you notice in our lineup thing, we're missing Raphael Harvey-Pinard. He is not waiver exempt, he is waiver exempt, as in he can just pass through for free, no problem. So it kind of begs the question, Jesse, someone like Jesse Ylonen, who if you sign him, which you probably will, and you have to put him through waivers, do you start him? Do you have to start him at the NHL level at this point? Just because, even though Raphael Harvey-Pinard maybe deserves it more, he has more flexibility going up and down, or do you just straight up give it to the player that you think is best and risk losing Ylonen for nothing?
It's a very hard decision. We know that Kent Hughes is going to be very pragmatic. It's going to be interesting to see his approach. Obviously, RHB is another player that is, well, in his example, he is waiver exempt, right? So that kind of is an X factor in all of this. That's why I feel like kind of the questions of Hoffman or Armia are huge in all of this because, I feel like, I could definitely see Ylonen in a package with Dvorak, just because we need to make some room for RHP, I think, on this team. I think he played way too good last year not to be on the opening night. We're trying to develop. And we want to send a message to our younger guys in Laval that if you come up here and you play really well, you're going to get rewarded. That is so important when you have so many young guys. They need to know, they need to have a clear example in the organization. If I come here and I work really hard, that there's going to be a spot for me. So I think that would be something really interesting to look. I know there's a couple teams, Boston even recently. I know they're looking for the 1-2, and Dvorak kind of fits into a 3C, but I could really see a possible packaging of Dvorak with Ylonen, even though I think he's a really good player. I love his shot. I love his potential. We just, we have a little bit of a glut right now. And for me, just one way or another, whether that's doing some sort of movement, Ylonen, whether it's Hoffman or Mia, we need to get RHP into that starting night lineup.
Yeah, I think so too. He has absolutely deserved it. He signed that extension at what could end up being a bargain. He's just too good to not make it. And Jesse Ylonen, love the guy, but if you have to risk losing him to play RHP for the season, I think you have to do it. It is what it is. It's an unfortunate situation. Also, Cayden Primeau is no longer waiver exempt, but I can't imagine if he needs to get called up for some reason that any team will really take him, because most teams have a guy kind of like him in their system anyway. So I feel like he won't be a problem. But yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward. That'll do it for this edition of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. We're like 10 subs away from 6,500. Hopefully we'll have passed that by the time you're watching this part of the video. I'm Josh Goss for my co-host Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.